everyone! So today we're going to be looking at the creative filters that are available in Photoshop. Let's get to it. Alright, so first off, what are filters? Now I know most of you are probably familiar with filters and them being used like in social media apps and phone apps to change up an image, but they started out in Photoshop. Now filters work by changing the look of an image using algorithms. Now, algorithms are basically just instructions for a computer. So a lot of filters are just like for example, there's like these orange glowy type filters like on Instagram and Snapchat. And what that does is that the computer looks at the image, it looks at like the brightest parts of the image, well, it usually adds an orange glow or cast to the entire image. Then it maybe looks at the lightest part of the images and adds like a little bit of a softening blur to it and maybe a little bit of contrast to the darkest parts. And it's just looking at the data that's in the image and applying these directions to it without actually, being able to, like our brains, look at an image and figure out what exactly you want to do to it. It just blindly applies the directions to the image. Oops, I'm throwing things here. So that's one of the great things about the filters in Photoshop is that we have so much more control over the look of the filter, over the intensity of the filter, and it kind of depends. We're going to be looking at a bunch of different filters today. Some of them have a whole lot of different controls. Some of them have just some basic controls, and that's really tied into when the filter was actually made. Usually the ones that have less controls were ones that were the original filters that came with Photoshop way back, and now they're still in here. And then the ones that have a lot more controls are some of the filters that are a bit newer and so have a lot more algorithmic processing power behind it. So let's keep going. You can use layer masks to add filters to specific areas. So instead of just being like, okay, filter on the whole image, you can decide, okay, I want this filter on this part of the image, this filter on the other part of the image. Just opens up a whole bunch of different possibilities. We're going to be looking at working on videos in Photoshop later on in the semester, but just so you know, filters can work on videos as well. So there's some very specific filters that are available in Photoshop that maybe aren't available in other programs, like video programs like Premiere, but you can use them in Photoshop and then export that video file and then bring it into Premiere for video projects. So it's something to keep in mind for the future. There are filters that simulate other creative processes, such as painting. There's actually multiple types of painting. There's like oil painting, watercolor painting, dry brush painting. There's all kinds of different painting filters in here. Mosaics. Mosaics are like when there's little tiles that are put together to create an image. That's what a mosaic is. There's a filter for that. Etching, screen printing. There's so many different filters that also simulate other creative processes. Now, the real power, I think, you're going to find that playing with the filters is just fun to begin with. But the real power is when you start combining filters to create advanced effects. And this just goes back to, my basics of Photoshop is that right now you are learning all of these different tools and techniques. And once you learn how it all works, you'll be able to use them and combine them to create a whole different set of looking graphics for your work. So for example, this image down here is from a tutorial, and it started off as a photograph, and then by using some very specific filters, for this one they used a zigzag filter. So usually a zigzag filter makes things look zigzaggy, and you're like, okay, that might look cool a couple times, but what else would you even use it on for a photo? Well, when you combine it with other filters and other features of Photoshop, you can create things like this where now this zigzag feature is applied to a pattern, which is then applied to this image, and it looks like an etching as if it were on currency, on money. So yeah, there's all kinds of different ways that you can use filters. Now, if you guys want to check out this, it's a little bit more of an advanced tutorial. So maybe, you know, click on it, save it to your YouTube, to a YouTube playlist or something for later, but I did want to go ahead and include it here. It is at least interesting to watch, so you can kind of get an idea of how filters can be used differently later. Anyways, yeah, super fun tutorial there. Now, some important things to know, and I'm going to actually be showing you this stuff in Photoshop, is that turning your layer into a smart object will allow you to adjust the filter later. Just like the adjustment layers where you can go ahead and double click on the icon, bring back up the options, change it up if it didn't work out. You can do the same thing with filters by using your layers as smart objects. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, some filters can only be used on 8-bit images. So if the filter is grayed out when you go to look at it, that probably means, I mean, it means that you can't use the filter for some reason. Most of the time, like 99% of the time, it's because you're working in a 16-bit image versus an 8-bit image. Now, if you remember from, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, our lecture on 8-bit and 16-bit images, 8-bit images can only hold so many colors, 256. I'm sorry, 256 is the levels of tone it could hold, while a 16-bit image can hold way more colors. So it's important to know that if you switch to an 8-bit image, if you switch your image to 8-bit and then try to go back to 16-bit, you're not going to get those colors back. You're not going to get those tones back. It's still going to be the same amount that you had with your 8-bit. So what I recommend you do is, if you're working with a 16-bit image that you want to convert to 8-bit, do all the edits you can in 16-bit mode, save it, and then save a copy. Save a copy to turn to 8-bit, okay? You might even want to include it in the file name. But yeah, go ahead and save a copy, change the file name, and then go ahead and go to image mode and select 8-bit, so it'll change it to 8-bit mode. But again, you cannot go backwards from there. You cannot add more data later. So that's why it's so important to have these different files saved, okay? All right, so in the next video, we're going to jump into Photoshop, and I'm going to show you some of these cool filters.